أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي كان موجودا قبل حدوث الأشياء ويبقى بعد فناء الأشياء. تفرد بالأولية والقدم ووسم كل شيء ما عداه بالفناء والعدم. كما قال عز شأنه: كل شيء هالك إلا وجهه وكل نفس ذائقة الموت. وقال: كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام. سبحان من لا يخفى عليه اختلاف النيات ولا يعذب عنه معاصي العباد في الخلوات. سبحان الله الذي منه خلقة العباد وإليه المعاد. فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يراه ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يراه. نشهد أن لا إله إلا هو الملك الذي لا ينازع في ملكه ولا يضاد في حكمه. يعذب من يشاء بما يشاء كيف يشاء ويرحم من يشاء بما يشاء كيف يشاء. تعذيبه المسيئين عدل وعفوه تفضل. ونشهد أن محمدا سيد المرسلين والمنذرين صلى الله عليه وآله الهداة المهديين. من ركب سفينتهم نجا واهتدى ومن تخلف عنها ضل فغرق وهوى. أوصيكم عباد الله بالاعتصام بالتقوى فإنه حبل متين وعروة وثقى. أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله ونظم أمركم. I advise you all and myself to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to organize our affairs. Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salatu wasalam in his famous sermon says: نزلت أنفسهم منهم في البلاء كالتي نزلت في الرخاء لولا الأجل الذي كتب الله عليهم لم تستقر أرواحهم في أجسادهم طرفة عين شوقا إلى الثواب وخوفا من العقاب. These are again the words from the famous sermon which is known as Khutba Muttaqeen in Nahj al-Balagha, and we have been discussing this khutbah and these phrases from this sermon for last 5 weeks or so. And now we have reached the point where Imam Ali notifies one more very important quality of the pious, the people, the God-fearing people. Imam Ali says that these people who are pious, who are God-fearing, they stay the same at the time of trial and at the time of comfort. And they do not complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what is coming to them. So this is one important quality. And then Imam says, لولا الأجل الذي كتب الله عليهم لم تستقر أرواحهم في أجسادهم طرفة عين. And if it was not for the decided time of their deaths, their spirits would not have remained in their bodies, and they even for a second, and their spirits would have departed from their bodies. For what? شوقا إلى الثواب وخوفا من العقاب. In the eagerness to get the reward and out of fear of the punishment. They would always want to meet their Lord. They do not want to live long lives in this world. Therefore, these are the two important qualities that Imam Ali mentions. Now today, we want to discuss about the first quality, which is that mu'min and a pious person and a God-fearing person stays the same way as, in both the situations, whenever he's put to trial and whenever he is in his comfort. Now this quality is known as rida and taslim. These scholars, they have talked very high of these qualities, and this status of rida and taslim has been mentioned throughout different verses in the Holy Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this. رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. So these verses tell us that this status of rida, status of contentment, status of satisfaction is very important in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when we talk about rida and when we talk about taslim, these two important levels and status that a pious person needs to achieve. We know that there are two types of contentment, and there are two types of satisfactions and submission. Rida means to stay content at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked, and taslim is to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and wish and orders. Now there are two types of rida and taslim. The scholars, they mention here the two types. First type of rida and taslim is where you are submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws, to his sharia, to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated upon us and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden us. So if a person does what he is being asked to do and what is obligatory upon him, and he refrains from doing what is forbidden, is known as rida, is known as taslim. And the second type is a very important type, where the scholars, they say that other than sharia, there is another level of rida and taslim, which is at the time of hardship, which is when you are facing difficult times, which is where you see things going on not according to your desires. You want something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something else from you. Therefore, at this time, let me give you an example. For example, it is time for Fajr, and you wake for your Fajr namaz, and you hear the azan, and then you get up and you prepare yourself for namaz, for your salat. This is a type of submission to the call of the prayer, to the obligation that you have been obligated for. So this is also a part of a type of rida and taslim. But there is a more elevated and a higher rank of rida and taslim, where sometimes, God forbid, if someone loses his loved one, if someone loses and someone dies in a family, that moment, if a person stays calm and is satisfied and is submitting to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is again a higher level of rida and a higher level of taslim, where a person says, okay, I tried my best. Sometimes, it happens a lot. People say, I'm trying hard, I'm doing everything what I can, I'm doing everything which is in my power and which is in my authority, but still I don't see the desired results in my business. So what is this? At this time, you have to stay content. This contentment and this satisfaction towards the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the status of rida and the status of taslim. Sometimes you see people, they fall sick, and their loved ones are there in the hospital. They try too much to revive them. The doctors, they try everything at their disposal, but still the patient does not survive, and they are unable to bring the person back, and he or she dies. That is the moment where you do everything what you could have done, but still you submit to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is greater than those obligations which are upon us. So these are the two types of submissions and satisfaction and contentment which Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam mentions. And remember, we are talking about this khutbah, this sermon of Imam Ali, where he is trying to tell us that the qualities Imam alayhi salatu wasalam is mentioning to his companions, his companion Hammam, who asked Imam and inquired about the qualities of the pious people. And Imam says, نَزَلَتْ أَنفُسُهُمْ مِنْهُمْ فِي الْبَلَاءِ كَالَّتِي نَزَلَتْ فِي الرَّخَاءِ. They stay the same even at the time of trials and at the time of comfort. Therefore, these are the two types of rida and taslim, contentment and submission. Now, coming to these 2 points, we have to go and look into a hadith and the ayats. What does these reports, they tell us? What does these verses, they tell us? There is a narration from the 8th Imam, Imam al-Rida alayhi salatu wassalam. Imam Rida, in fact, his title is also Rida. He submits to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where the 8th Imam, he says, now look at the importance of this status, this quality which Imam alayhi salatu wasalam says a muttaqi person should have. Imam says, Al-imanu arba'atu arkanin. Your iman, your faith, depends, has four pillars. Your iman has four pillars. التوكل على الله عز وجل, reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the glorified, the almighty. You rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the first one. The second is الرضاء بقضائه. You have to stay content towards the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Staying content, staying satisfied towards the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the second one. Third one is وَالتَّسْلِيمُ لِأَمْرِ اللَّهِ. You submit to the wish and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is we are talking about, the rida and the taslim. And then the fourth pillar, Imam says it, التفويض إلى الله, and then you entrust your deeds, your matters to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the four important pillars of faith. Amongst these two are the ones which Imam Ali ﷺ is trying to mention, and is one of the qualities of the pious people, that you stay content and you submit to the will of Allah. It might be against your wish. There are so many things that goes around in this world. It is not necessary whatever we desire should come and should happen. No. There are so many times that we desire something but we don't achieve it. So this is the time and this is the moment that we need to show this contentment and this submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Ali salatu wasalam tells us something very unique about the Prophet Dawood. Imam says, أوحى الله تعالى إلى داود يا داود. One day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to his prophet David, Dawood. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, O Dawood, turidu wa urid. You desire and I also desire. You have your desires and I have my desires. Turidu wa urid. Wa urid. Wa la yakunu illa ma urid. And remember one thing, but nothing will happen except what I desire. You desire and I desire. But what is going to happen is according to my desires. In aslamta lima urid a'taytuka lima turid. I will give you what you desire. Wa in lam tuslim lima urid attaba'tuka fiha turid thumma la yakunu illa ma urid. But remember one thing, but if you do not submit to my desires, you will go on wandering into your desires. But at the end of the day, you remember, what is going to happen is going to be according to my desires. So even if you desire, your desires are according to my desires, it does not matter. Even if your desires are not according to my desires, again does not matter. What is going to happen is the desire of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore it is wise to comply to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides for you. These are the results of submitting to the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam says it is something very, it is logical. If a person is intellectual and if he knows that everything going around in this world is going to be according to the will and wish of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then a person needs to submit to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a story of a pious person in Bani Israel. He had a dream one day, and he dreams of his friend, and he sees that his friend has achieved a very lofty status in heaven, and a status even this abid and this pious person does not have. So out of surprise, he goes on searching his friend, and when he finds him, he looks closely, what is he doing in his day-to-day life. So he sees that he's not doing something extra, whereas this person who was an abid, he prays Salatul Tahajjud, whatever, that time I don't know, Salatul Tahajjud would not have been there, but he does things extra. But this person, the friend, does not do, he's just doing his obligations. So he monitors and observes for a day and sees he's not doing something extra. Then he goes to his friend and he asks, I had this dream and I saw that you have a very high status in the paradise, even higher than me. I'm an abid, but you have a higher status. What extra you are doing other than, praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than fulfilling your obligations? So he says, I don't do anything extra, but something that I think is unique in my life is that whenever I fall sick, I do not complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whenever things don't go according to my desires, I don't complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, whenever I stand under the burning sun, I do not, go in search for a shade, and I do not complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I wait for the sun to set and then I find my shade. So he says, I do not complain to anything. I am satisfied and I am submitting to the will and the wish of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this, then the Abid says, this is something which is unique in your life. And this is something that has given you a high status in the heaven, even higher than me. So every person needs to understand. And coming to a very important point, I would like to mention this ayah at the end of this first sermon and connect it with the second sermon to these days, the days which are dedicated to the Lady of Heaven, the Lady of Light, Lady Fatima Zahra Salamullah alayha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in chapter Nisa, and listen to this very carefully, and I'm giving you something to think upon it. I don't have enough time to go into details, but inshallah you will think over it. Chapter Nisa, and remember the topic is ar-rida wa taslim, to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to stay content and satisfied towards the will and wish of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Chapter An-Nisa, verse number 65, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِي مَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم. I swear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I swear upon your Lord. Allah swears upon himself and says, I swear by your Lord that they will not be considered believers unless, O Prophet, unless they take you as a judge for their disputes, for you to come and to solve their disputes. This is something very important. And then when they take you as a judge and when you pass your verdict, thumma, this is important, thumma la yajidu fi anfusihim harajan mimma qadayta wa yusallimu taslima. And when you pass your judgment and when you pass your verdict, they should not find dissent and discomfort in their hearts for what you have judged, for what verdict you have passed, because it might be against a party and it might be in favor of another party. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when they take you as a judge for their disputes and you pass a verdict, they should not find a dissent in their hearts. They should not find a discomfort feeling in their hearts for your judgment. And they should وَيُسَلِّمُ تَسْلِيمًا, and they should submit to your verdict in full submission. This is what? This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, La yu'minuna, they will not be considered mu'min if they do not take you as the judge and they do not accept your judgment. Now, this is one of the criteria of being a mu'min. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying very clearly that the Holy Prophet, when he gives you a verdict, when he passes a decision, you have to accept it wholeheartedly. You should not find any type of discomfort in your heart. Now the Holy Prophet is going and departing from this world. His will and wish, the last will and wish, is that after me, my successor should be Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now if there were some companions looking for this position, that after the Holy Prophet, I might be chosen to be the successor and the leader of the Muslim Ummah, and Rasulullah is appointing Amir al-Mu'mineen, then those people should not find any type of discomfort in their hearts. If they were expecting such a position for themselves, they should not find any discomfort. If someone was expecting that my father would become the successor, they should not find any type of discomfort in their hearts regarding this decision of the Holy Prophet. Now this is very clear. It is not something very ethical. It is something related to our theology, our belief. When the Holy Prophet says that this is something that should be done, you have to go according to what the Holy Prophet says. And Allah, it is not only, people talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the raza and the taslim and submission to the will of Allah. Allah says, my will is the will of the Holy Prophet. If you submit to the will of the Holy Prophet, it is as if you are submitting to my will. You are submitting to my wish. And it is the wish and the will of Allah and the Holy Prophet that after the Holy Prophet, it should be Ali ibn Abi Talib who should lead the Islamic and the Muslim Ummah. I will continue this in the next part of the sermon. Inna ahsan al-hadith wa ablagh al-maw'idha kitab Allah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا والشفيع المذنبين أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما حجة ابن الحسن المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. We were discussing about the sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen, where Amir al-Mu'mineen points out to a very important attribute and a quality of the pious. And Imam says that these pious people, they stay calm and they stay the same. Their position is the same at the time of trials and at the time of comfort. They do not complain. They have this position of rida and taslim, total submission towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a feeling of contentment. Now, because these days are dedicated to the daughter of the Holy Prophet and her martyrdom, it would be unfair not discussing her life and her sunnah and her seerah during these days. Now, again, coming to this point of rida, the two very important titles of Lady Fatima Zahra Salamun alayha is Radiya and Mardiya. Radiya is someone who submits to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Mardiya is someone, a lady, the lady whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with. So once you are submitting to Allah, and second, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you. And sometimes you see these qualities of submitting to rida and taslim at such a high level that a servant's satisfaction becomes the satisfaction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is subhanallah amazing. You know, a satisfaction of a servant becomes the satisfaction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the Holy Prophet says, Inna Allaha yaghdabu li ghadabi Fatima. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes angry with the anger of Lady Zahra Salamullah alayha. Wa yarda li ridaha. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with her pleasure. Whatever pleases Lady Zahra Salamullah alayha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with that. And this important hadith tells us that the pleasure is not only confined to the pleasure and to the submission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah has also asked that you need, in order to please me, Allah says, in order to please me, you need to please my Prophet. You need to please the Holy Prophet. You need to please the household of the Holy Prophet. And this is, my friends, this is not history that I'm discussing with you. This is our belief system. This is our ideology. And this is what we are living for. And this is what we need to preach, and we need to tell people that your ibadah, this attending Friday sermons, this attending these majalis, they are all going to be useless if a person does not have the essence of this tawalla, of this love of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. You need to understand, there is a hadith, if I don't quote it wrongly, there is a hadith which goes on like this, that addibu awladakum on three things. Groom your children. The upbringing of your children should be upon three things. Hubbu nabiyikum, hubbu ahl baytihi, wal Quran al-Kareem. You need to groom your children with the love of the Holy Prophet, with the love of the household of the Holy Prophet and Quran. This is what you need. This is the tarbiyah. This is the upbringing. This is something what the Holy Prophet is saying. There is namaz, there is salah, there is saum, there is hajj. Everything is there. No doubt about it. We do it. But what is the very essence? What is the foundation of all these things? It is the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if you are pleasing Lady Zahra Salamullah alayha, you are pleasing me. And if she is displeased and she's angry with someone, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry with them. Now, I will just very quickly quote a story of Allama Amini, which I remember, I'm sure I have quoted it here once. I will again quote it because it is very important and it has a very rock solid proof towards what we Shias we believe. Now, Allama Amini was a great scholar. He does not need an introduction right now. He was visiting today. They know it as Saudi Arabia. It was known as Hijaz back in those days. So he visits there, and the scholars, the muftis, and the hafaz of hadith and Quran, because he was a famous person, so they invite him, and they say that, you know, we want to invite you. And Allama Amini wants to, somehow does not want to participate in this gathering, and he says, no, I cannot. But they insist. So he, at the end of the day, accepts it, but on one condition, that we are not going to debate on anything. We are just going to come there. I'm just going to come there, participate in your dinner, and then I'm going to leave. Now, for my youth here, the young brothers here, to understand this reasoning in the form of this story. Now, Allama Amini accepts the invitation and goes and joins the gathering. And after the dinner, one of the muftis, he says, we want to start a discussion if you allow us. So Allama Amini says, we had a deal and we had a condition. I'm not going to, have any discussion with you here. So the mufti says, okay, it's okay. We will not have a discussion. But at least, out of the respect of this gathering, the scholars are here, the huffaz, the memorizers of Quran, people who have memorized thousands and thousands of hadith. And there's great scholars that I have invited here in your honor. So at least, let us bless our gathering and our meeting with a hadith and a saying of a holy prophet. So Allama Amini says, okay, fine, if as long as we are not having any debate, it's fine. So everybody started, quoting a hadith and a riwayah one by one. They all. When Allama Amini's chance, it was his turn. So he says, I will quote a hadith and I will narrate a hadith, but on one condition, that you all have to confirm the authenticity of what I'm quoting and the narration what I'm going to, quote. So they all agree. They all say, okay, fine. So Allama Amini says that the hadith says, Man mata walam ya'rif imam zamanihi mata maytatal jahiliyyah. I want my kids here and my young ones, brothers here, to memorize these hadith. These are the fundamentals of your faith and belief. Man mata walam ya'rif imam zamanihi mata maytatal jahiliyyah. One who does not recognize and does not know the imam of his time dies a death of an ignorant. Death of ignorance. What ignorance? The era of ignorance, the era of Jahiliyyah, means the death of a kafir. So if a person does not know the time, the imam of his or her time dies a death of an infidel. So they all confirmed. They said, yes, we have this narration in our books. Allama Amini asks, is it sahih? Is it hasan? Is it mursal? Is it da'if? They all say it's sahih. And they all accept the authenticity of this hadith. And then Allama Amini says, I have a question for you. This hadith you have confirmed. Now, I have a question. Whether the daughter of the Holy Prophet, when she died, did she know who was the Imam of her time? So this was a very burning question. And this is a very pinching question to them. If they said she knew the Imam of the time, then they would have, have to answer who was the Imam. If it was Imam Ali, then why you are appointing someone else in the place of Imam Ali to be the successor? This is one thing. And if they say no, she did not know the Imam of her time, then the lady of the heaven is dying, na'udhu billah, a death of an ignorant. She is Sayyidatun Nisa al-Alameen. It is again there in your books. So they stayed quiet. And if they would say that the Imam of her time was Abu Bakr, then again in Sahih al-Bukhari, I have the reference. Sahih Bukhari says, Fatimatu matat wa hiya sakhitatun alayhima. Fatima died and she was angry with these two people. What are you going to do with this hadith? They did not have any way to answer this. Allama Amini says the heads were down. There was utter quiet silence. Nobody answered anything, and they all started leaving the gathering. This is what confirms the truth. This is what confirms the authenticity of the belief of the Shia. That yes, if you want to, and this is the importance of Fatimiyya. This is the importance of these days, that we need to reflect, we need to understand, we need to remember the martyrdom of Lady Zahra Salaamullah alayha. Wow, for what did she sacrifice her life? the only daughter of the Holy Prophet, coming behind the door, and the Muslimin kicking the half-burning door and killing the daughter of the Holy Prophet, rupturing her lungs and breaking her ribs. This is how you respect the Holy Prophet. This is how you respect the household of the Holy Prophet. Inna Allah yarda li rida Fatima. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with the pleasure of Lady Zahra salamullah alayha. And I cannot think, people sometimes they say, don't get into all these disputes. These are historical disputes, and these are things which are these are things which happened in the past, and it does not, relate to us anymore. It does not relate to us anymore. These are things which the elders, they had this dispute. You can forget this. These are those paradoxical statements that confuse a naive person, a simple-minded person. These are not things that are easy to, just overlook. Lady Zahra salamullah alayha is not just any elderly person. No, she is someone that holds responsibility of guiding the ummah after the Holy Prophet, along with Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is not something that you can take lightly. This is not something you can forget about it. People who say, forget about it, do not want to go into details, because, if you dig up the details, you're going to find something very scary. People who have been believing and who have been, respecting someone would find them at the end of the day, the culprits are those whom you're respecting. So they do not want to dig up the history. And this is something which is very important for us. This is the issue of the daughter of the Holy Prophet. We cannot take it lightly. You are talking, you sometimes commemorate the martyrdom, the Muslimin I'm talking about. They commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. He was the grandson of the Holy Prophet. Now, while you are commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, you are obliged to commemorate the martyrdom of the mother of Imam Hussein, who was the daughter of the Holy Prophet. You respect the grandson, but you're not respecting the daughter enough. Why this hypocrisy? These are things that Muslimin need to sit down and think and, try to understand with a very, unbiased approach. And these are the things which, in today is very important, and these are not things which are, instigating any type of disagreements or, fights between the ummah. No, this is something that needs to be solved. And because of these issues, we see such, killings and hatred amongst the Muslim ummah. Unless and until you don't solve this issue, the Muslim ummah is going to be in this position. Yes, we are waiting for the arrival and the reappearance of our Imam, the Imam of our time. When he's going to come, things are going to be put into place. But it is better if the ummah understands things and accepts the truth before Imam comes. Otherwise, it's going to be very late. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our deeds, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to understand and to imitate in the footsteps of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wassalam. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على نبينا أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد. وصل على أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب. وصل على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد. وصل على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. اللهم صل على محمد. وعلى علي بن الحسين. اللهم صل على محمد. ومحمد بن علي. وجعفر بن محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. وموسى بن جعفر. اللهم صل على محمد. وعلي بن موسى. اللهم صل على محمد. ومحمد بن علي. اللهم صل على محمد. وعلي بن محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. والحسن بن علي. اللهم صل على محمد. والحجة بن الحسن القائم المنتظر المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات، تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات، إنك مجيب الدعوات، إنك على كل شيء قدير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.